When I started studying TCV in 2015, it was really hurting my brain because I couldn't make it match what I knew. And so finally, what I realized is that I just had to understand that it's more of an energetic parallel to the physical body. Traditional Chinese medicine or traditional Chinese veterinary medicine was developed over a very long period of time, 5,000 years for the human side and over 3,000 years for the veterinary side. They did this without the aid of any advanced diagnostic equipment. So that means that all of these concepts were developed purely through observation, seeing how people responded to treatments or animals responded to treatments. And so if you had something similar to what somebody in the emperor's family had, it was both a good and a bad thing because you were now the guinea pig. So when it worked, it was awesome because you got better, but they also used to use things like mercury, which they called cinnabar, for treatments. So when it didn't work, you got really sick and died. So it just has been developed over thousands and thousands of years. And it was interesting during the cultural, actually even slightly before the Cultural Revolution in China, Mao all of a sudden had millions and millions of people to take care of and no healthcare system. And he had promised a lot to the individual person. So the barefoot doctors were born, and basically these were mostly women that were given about 6 weeks of training in traditional Chinese medicine, a bag of needles and a few herbs, and sent to small villages to provide healthcare for people. So that's how it got really distributed out to the common person and not just to the emperor and all of his lackeys. So again, over 3,000 years ago for farm animals, so Bo Lee's Canon is the first text helping to provide sort of treatment protocols for cattle and horses, because oxen and horses, because they were doing the majority of the work. These animals were so important to people to maintain their livelihood. And again, in humans, the system started to become developed over 5,000 years ago. Now, pets, dogs and cats, are a relatively new advent in Chinese medicine. And when China opened up in the 70s, there were several veterinarians that went over and started getting training in what was available in veterinary medicine and the human side. And so they adapted treatments for pets from both human and animal texts. And so interestingly, pet care with traditional Chinese medicine really was an invention of the West. And then China has had to regain it, if you will, over time. The underlying concept of TCV and many concepts in China is the Tao. And are you familiar with the concept of Tao, or the way I think the Tao is also spelled T-A-O? So the Tao of Pooh is a very common book that people will read to start to understand this. But basically, the idea is seeking balance, keeping ourselves in harmony with the world and then harmony within the body. So the Tao breaks things down from a macro scale down to the micro scale. And in each step, we seek harmony within each level. This is often illustrated by the yin-yang symbol. And so the idea is that the opposites create the whole. And the real concept, when you start studying it in China and in some of the more common literature, is truly duality and not opposites. In the United States, in the Western world, we tend to have this idea that opposites are good and bad. But the truth is that without both concepts, you can't understand either concept. So for instance, there's plenty of associations of night being evil and day being good. But the reality is that without nighttime, there's no daytime. And so it's a continuum instead of good and bad. So we could also say something about good and evil is another concept, light and dark, wet and dry. So it's all interesting. So if you're in the middle of a rainstorm, being wet's not so great, but being dry can be a very pleasant experience when you've been sort of drenched. This was one of the hardest concepts for me to wrap my head around, was that it's a duality and that one could not exist without the other. Where all of this came from is that TCVM is concentrated on maintaining and restoring internal balance. So both understanding what causes the imbalance and then also how to restore it. One of the biggest concepts is qi, or which you'll see spelled CHI, but more commonly, the correct way would be QI. This is literally energy that powers the body. It flows along a network of meridians, and the meridians are what control the flow of energy through the organs and the rest of the body. Imbalances occur when there is a blockage of the flow of qi. So that's a simple down and dirty understandings. And I'll talk a little bit more about the Zhang Fu organs, but the meridians have names of organs. So the stomach channel, the spleen channel, the small intestine channel, and they are on the extremities. So down through the arms and the fingers, down through the legs and the feet, but they also dive into the organ for which they are named. And so this is one of the concepts with Chinese medicine, with acupuncture, acupressure, is that when you stimulate a point on the channel, you affect how the organ functions. And so various points will stimulate different parts of the meridian, which can affect both the local organ as well as other parts of the bodies. The other thing that can be a bit confusing about TCVM is that there are many words that are similar to conventional medicine or physiologic concepts. So if you see the word with a capital B, blood, that means it is the concept of blood in traditional Chinese medicine. If you see a lowercase b, then that's a physiologic concept. So blood and blood are not equal. Liver and liver have different functions. And again, if you can think of the TCV concepts of these organs as energetic parallels, you're going to be able to wrap your head around it a little bit more quickly. So the other thing, as I mentioned, is the Zhang Fu organs. The concepts of the organs are similar in many cases to the Western organ function, but some of them are very different. So for instance, the spleen is considered to be the main digestive organ. And again, because they were working with observation, the spleen was pretty huge. So they decided that it really was very important for digestion because it was so close to the stomach where the food was received. So they assigned it functions of the pancreas and more. Because the Chinese understood that there was energetic transformation of food into qi as the life force, it's a very different mechanism of understanding digestion. Zhang organs are the solid organs and Fu are the hollow organs, and they are paired. So for instance, the kidney's paired with the urinary bladder, the heart is paired with the small intestine, which intuitively doesn't make sense. And again, this is because of the concept of the Tao bringing us back to duality. So we know that the solid organ does the majority of the function in Chinese medicine, and the hollow organ takes away the waste, or as Dr. Shea said, the husband takes out the garbage. The interesting thing here is that the solid organs, the thing that do the majority of the work, are considered to be feminine to some degree. And this is where it starts to get interesting. I remember the first time I saw this slide, it was like, yeah. But basically, there are two slides depicting relationships between these elements. We're talking about organs, and I'm shifting to elements. Each element has its main organ. So the fire element is associated with the heart and the small intestine. Earth is associated with spleen and stomach, metal with lung, large intestine, water with kidney and bladder, and then wood is the liver and gallbladder. And then over here are two things that they didn't know what to do with. They knew the triple burner you can think of more closely as almost chakras, but essentially they're the three sources of fire within the body. So in the heart, in the digestion, and then in the kidneys is the last part of fire. And they also didn't quite know what to do with the pericardium. They knew it was important because it was protecting the heart. So although these are not associated with an element, they are paired together in terms of systems of function. So the generating cycle shows the relationship between the parent element and the child. And when they're basically healthy and on even footing. And then the second image shows the control cycle, or the K cycle. And this is a relationship between the grandparent and the grandchild. So if metal is the parent to water, that means earth is the parent to metal, therefore the grandparent to water. So we have a main constitutional element that defines us and can help predict our strengths and weaknesses and areas that may challenge our health later. And so that's part of why I'll use that pet personality form which is part of the intake form, to help determine the pet's constitutional element, as well as what other elements may be out of balance. So we can use this to assess for health issues, making sure that the pet's element's in balance, and then how to reduce the severity of the disease later. Part of that we can approach with food therapy, but also with acupuncture, acupressure, and herbs. Looking at the charts above, it works like this. In the generating cycle, green, healthy wood slows the flames of fire because it's not too dry and brittle, but keeps it burning. Fire generates ashes to help build the earth. Earth solidifies and then turns into metal, cuts a path for water to flow, and then water nurtures the growing wood. So in the control cycle, then earth can dam up water, metal can cut back unruly wood, and then water slows the flames of fire, and fire softens and tempers metal. So to use this information in relationship to life, if your pet's a fire animal, we'd want to use acupuncture points or herbs or food to tonify fire, but we would also want to tonify water to help keep it under control so we don't burn the water out. And then we can also tonify the wood element to help make sure that there's plenty of fuel to keep the fire burning. A Shen calming point, so the Shen, or the mind, is considered to be housed in the heart. And if it's too hot, then the Shen comes out and does things it shouldn't. And then with 5 or 6 points, then we can really keep this person or pet in balance. And then again, because you all may learn acupressure, but what you can use is food and herbs. We can use those same concepts to help keep things under control and in balance. Well, if we've got a dog that is, as my teacher used to say, crazy dancing on the rooftops, which is like really extreme Shen disturbance, or as we like to say in the South, batshit crazy, you can look at the fact that probably both the wood and the fire element are out of balance, and this dog is way too hot energetically and or physically. And so then we can start to say, okay, let's see, how can we actually cool this guy down physically in some cases? And how can we start to help support the liver so that it can be more fluid and soft and moist? And so that will help to control the fire. And then all of a sudden, this pet starts getting better. So it really has been a great resource, but it does definitely take some letting go of what you know to start to understand it a little bit more. Now, this next slide is also something that they threw out. Basically, this is what they call the TCVM clock, or TCM clock, and every organ has a time during which it's most active. There's a beautiful story that people can tell you about. So for instance, you get up at 6 o'clock in the morning, you go to the bathroom, so the large intestine empties itself, and then you're hungry, so you eat something, and then hours later, your digestive system is working, so the spleen is more active, and so on and so forth. And that's a nice way to remember the story. But where this is super useful is sometimes people will tell you, my dog wakes up all the time. He'll go to bed at, so the gallbladder is the organ that's associated with making a decision. Or my dog wakes up at, so the liver is associated with anxiety and irrational anxiety, if you will. And so then you can say, okay, so we've got that to take care of. So you can use this to help you understand where things are problematic when it's not crystal clear, but it can be a really useful tool. So if you go back to understanding what each of the organs does, then boom, you're there. All of this to say that as time goes by, organs become unbalanced, and they can either be under controlled or over controlled. And this imbalance will just creates a disruption of the flow of qi and sometimes blood. And then we start to see symptoms of a disease happening. So for instance, a really common pattern diagnosis in TCV is a pattern of disharmony or imbalance, if you will, is liver overacting on spleen, or liver qi stagnation, which also makes the liver overact on spleen. So if we go back to this concept, and wood is controlling of earth to keep it in balance, but the liver, the wood element, is all cranked up, then it's going to be the mean grandparent that goes over and pulls that child across its lap and gives it a good spanking, whether the child needs it or not. And so what ends up happening then is, because the spleen is the main digestive organ, transforming the food that we eat into energy or guqi, if the liver is cranking on the spleen all the time, i.e. that dog is very anxious, then the dog starts spitting up, or the cat starts vomiting on your sheets or something of this nature. So we can then, use that to connect the dots between, oh, this animal is actually pretty anxious, to why this animal is vomiting. And it's not because it needs Pepsid or an acid blocker. It needs to calm down and get a little more tranquil. And as we start to reduce that anxiety and stress, then we can start to see those digestive problems come back under control. The spleen was assigned many functions of the pancreas, because it's a larger organ, and also the liver controls the flow of blood and qi and stores blood, which is considered to be a nutritive fluid. Then you might start having indigestion, or your dog or your cat may start spitting up. So again, the stagnation starts to develop in the liver. The stagnation makes the liver hot, and then you develop symptoms ranging from belching, vomiting, and gas to diarrhea. And then long-term, liver overacting on spleen can result in inflammatory bowel disease. For those of you, if you start to think about it, for some of your pets, and Michael, you've seen this in practice, this pet starts vomiting twice a week, but it's just clear foam, so we don't worry about it. And then a year down the road, it starts vomiting up its dinner once a week. And then another year down the road, it starts having diarrhea once a month, and then once a week, and then so on and so forth, until it's having either severe vomiting and or diarrhea 3 or 4 times a week, and it's just miserable. And so now we can call it inflammatory bowel disease in conventional medicine and give it steroids, instead of saying it's not really normal for your dog to be vomiting up clear foam twice a week. What's going on? When does your dog vomit up the clear foam? Is there something going on in the house? And this is where you can start asking these types of questions so that you can intervene a little bit more early in life. But it was just incredible for the guide dogs. We'd see them, and these guys work so hard. So guide dogs for the blind, they're taking people across 4-lane highways, and the people are trusting them to do this. And dang near every one of them end up with some sort of a GI disorder later in life, because that is a really stressful job. We were able to help slow this down to some degree, but there were many guides that ended up having to retire at 4 instead of 8, which is just so hard for everybody, because the guides and their handlers, if you will, or people, develop a profoundly close relationship. So that's a way over the top example, but it is really common. let's see, how do we balance these disharmonies? We can use herbs, we can use food, we can use acupressure or acupuncture, and we can use tuina, which is a form of Chinese medical body work. It's believed that chiropractic was actually developed from tuina because the Chinese rail workers showed Dr. Palmer how they would treat each other, and he developed chiropractic from that system. So, of these things, as you start to say, oh, okay, this dog has been chronically anxious all of its life, then we can use some herbs to help reduce liver qi stagnation. And then we can use some herbs to help improve digestion so that the spleen is stronger. And we can also alter the diet to help support those organs quite a bit better. One of the really cool relationships I've been able to make is with Herbsmith, and Dr. Basant developed a pet friendly version or a pet owner friendly version of her herbs that are, designed to treat the most common disharmony patterns that we see. And so as we go forward, we're going to be working with them to set up wholesale accounts for you. So that's something that you can take advantage of and then use with pretty high success. Because if you have the basic concepts under your belt, then you'll know which formulas are going to be most efficient. And frankly, there's 10 or 12 formulas that will treat 80% of the problems, which is awesome. One of the other concepts is energetics. So they are present both in food and herbs as sort of treatment modalities, as well as everything in life. And in South Carolina, it's a hot, damp climate. The basic concepts are hot, cold, and neutral foods. And so in food therapy, if you've got a super hot dog that lives in Charleston, South Carolina, or in Arizona, then that's when you'd want to use cooling proteins, cooling vegetables, things of that nature. If you've got a cold-natured dog that lives in Wisconsin, you're going to want to use the more warming foods. So things like lamb, sweet potatoes, things like that. And then neutral temperature is for a dog that it doesn't much matter one way or the other. And so that's going to be beef, mushrooms, things of that nature. I wish I could tell you that food therapy was like, wow, just amazing. I think it's a great long-term strategy, but I think it's more important to end up rotating foods to help the entire body, both on a physiologic level and as well as a TCM level. And then the other big issue is that there are so many food sensitivities. What might be ideal in Chinese medicine, the pet can't eat. So that's the other thing you have to really consider. So again, that brings us back to the 5 elements and what that might look like in each pet or each personality shows up in our pets. The constitutional element is what is the main element that an animal is associated with. It defines the characteristics of personality, what health issues may show up later, and also helps us design a plan to support that pet. The first one up is earth. There are many in Chinese medicine that believe that if the spleen is happy, everything else falls in line. So if we keep the earth element and the spleen happy, then everybody else is good. So again, the organs associated are the spleen and the stomach, and they're responsible for receiving and processing the food we have eaten into gu qi, or Gucci, which is, if you say that rapidly, people are like, well, I don't need fancy shoes for my dog. But this is where Gucci is then transformed into the protective immune system, or the Wei Qi. So to help promote health for the earth animal, it is really important that damp and cold are avoided, and warm temperature foods that are drying in nature served at room temperature, at a warm temperature, to support the spleen. So there's a list of foods that are typically helpful. The chicken is very warming, beef is neutral, but it is a qi tonic, et cetera, and then draining foods like kidney beans, mushrooms, mustard, ginger, things of that nature can be super helpful as well. In general, you want to avoid lots of fatty foods and dairy. So To Chinese medicine practitioners, ice cream is the most abhorrent food that you could possibly ever eat because it is cold, literally. It's made with dairy and lots of fat. So all of this engenders damp. You drop a cold bomb into your stomach, your digestion stops until your stomach has a chance to warm it back up. But yeah, it's like everything, you got to take it with a grain of salt. The next one is water. The water animal often has rear end weakness and pain, urinary tract issues, and kidney disease, and then especially with age, deafness. So these are all things that are associated with the kidney and urinary bladder, again, are associated with water element. We can see infection in either of these Western organs, and more frequently kidney failure as the animal ages. The other thing that's important to remember about the kidney is that it stores Jing or essence and also provides the yuan or source qi, which powers the body. So it's important to help keep the kidney cool and moist so it doesn't burn up its Jing, although the wheat grain itself, because it was pulled from dog food probably close to 20 years ago now, can actually be eaten by many dogs. And millet, brown rice, and then any type of bean are helpful. Peas, sweet potatoes, the whole 9 yards. Kidney beans I used to use exclusively in the crock pet diet because they drain damp, they tonify blood because they're red, and then they're kidney shaped, so they actually tonify the kidneys. The next element is fire, and again, the heart is the main element, but the pericardium physically protects the heart. So it's involved with the fire element, but at a distance. So again, pericardium and triple heater, the warming system within the body, is associated with fire too. And then small intestine is the husband organ for the heart. Hence, really digestion problems with the small intestine for those that are hyped up all the time. The other thing is that the shen or the mind is housed in the heart. So if there's too much heat or too much heat from the liver, then the shen goes up and wanders around doing things it shouldn't do. So this can cause those really weird reactions in a situation or environment that aren't useful to the animal. So for instance, the dog that freaks out about firecrackers, and this is unfortunately more and more common, but this animal is probably already a fire element and it's already a little too hot. And then you add something that is surprising and it really freaks them out. And so this sort of shen disturbance pops up. It can be difficult to understand the difference between shen disturbance and liver qi stagnation, but the factor that I think of most is that liver qi stagnation is more just general anxiety, and then shen disturbance is the pet doing something crazy that really is just an irrational response to the situation. So for separation anxiety, destroying the door frame or destroying the sofa because that's what it can get to. For pets that are highly reactive, seeing something that moves very quickly and having to attack it and kill it. And oops, that was the neighbor's cat. So things of that nature where the response is way over the top for what it should be. So again, we're going to focus on cooling the fire animal down, and adding in leafy greens will help tonify the liver as well as add cooling nature to it so we can get the fire to calm down and the shen to settle back in the heart. Wood animals, so these are the ones that tend to have ear infections, skin issues, especially between the toes, the groin, the armpits, and then eyes. And then often they'll also have liver and gallbladder disease, as these two organs are associated with the wood element. Later in life, blood stagnation tumors, which these are the really horrible ones, osteosarcomas, hemangiosarcs, fibrosarcomas, things of that nature may develop because, again, the liver directs the flow of blood and qi. And if the blood becomes stagnant, cells stick to places where they shouldn't. And this is the theory behind these really horrible malignant cancers being developed. Stiffness, joint problems, and seizures are also associated with liver imbalance too. And then again, because the liver is often blood deficient, this is where adding blood tonics, so beef, rabbit, and chicken are a good choice, as well as millet, brown rice, carrots, and then again, kidney beans as well. And then seaweed helps to keep things moving. So it softens stagnations and keeps things flowing along. The other big thing is to make sure that these guys are getting moderate exercise and a job so that they are kept occupied and with a role in life that's important to them. And the wood animals they tend to be Rottweilers, Dobbies, dogs that and then the collies, the border collies, the working dogs, they tend to be really dedicated to their jobs. And if they're not doing a job, they can do really crazy stuff. And the metal animal are not so common to be seen, but they tend to be more aloof and removed from the action. They tend to have chronic respiratory issues like sniffles, asthma, bronchitis, and then they also tend to constipation, as the large intestine is the husband to the lung. So allergies are a huge issue because, again, the wei qi, so if the diaphragm is here, the stomach and the spleen are down here, up here is the heart and the center, and then the lungs from here. You can picture wei qi as coming up from the stomach through the lungs and creating like an umbrella over the lungs. And so this is part of why the metal animal tends to have immune system deficiencies or overactivities. So allergens are one of the things that will penetrate the skin and come in through the intestines and create more allergy symptoms. So these guys are more sensitive to drying out and getting cold, and as a result, they need to eat foods that are moistening, but also things that are warming and blood tonics. And then also, if we tonify qi and yang, which are the more warming fluids, then using things like lamb, chicken, white rice, and cinnamon, and then also just balancing things out with things that will tonify the metal element, which tofu actually will, interestingly. So then that takes us down to, and I've been dancing around this topic, the essential fluids of qi, blood, yin, yang, and jing. So with these essential fluids, we can think of them this way. Blood is what transports qi to the body, but qi directs the flow of blood. And to some degree, that first part makes sense because blood is a nutritive fluid, whether you think of it in terms of traditional Chinese medicine or in terms of physiologic medicine. The blood literally carries nutrients to the other tissues. Jing is essence. It is stored in the kidneys, and there is both prenatal and postnatal jing. The amount of jing that you're born with, or the prenatal jing, determines the length of your life and the health span that you enjoy or don't enjoy. Postnatal jing is derived from food, and it is created if there is an excess of gu qi available. So remember, we talked about gu qi going up into the lungs, creating wei qi, creating this defensive system. So if there's been an abundance of wei qi created, if there's still gu qi left over, then that gets transported back down to the kidneys and turned into postnatal jing. So, what your grandma told you to eat your vegetables is absolutely right, because that's one of the best ways to stay healthy. And then yin is a cooling, nourishing fluid, and yang is the warming energy that is derived from both qi and jing. So jing, we talked about briefly, is being converted into yuan or qi energy, which gets distributed through the body into the other organs. So general patterns you will see is that cats tend to be yin deficient. So meaning that most of their disease patterns come from chronic yin deficiency. So for instance, kidney failure in cats is almost always due to yin deficiency because they tend to run hot, burn out that cooling fluid. And when the kidney can't create enough yin, then it starts to do all sorts of crazy stuff and not work properly. So when that cooling fluid isn't available to balance the yang in the kidney, then the kidney starts to malfunction. It allows too much water to go through the body and out through the urine, things of that nature. For dogs, kidney disease tends to be from the kidney overspending its yang and jing. And that happens because Labradors will chase a ball until they literally fall over or you put the ball away. So there are certain breeds that tend to be obsessive about what they do. and that will end up creating kidney disease down the road. Again, dogs can be yin or yang deficient. And again, much of that is dictated by the environment they live in, as well as their constitutional element, also how they're fed, and then the diseases they're prone to due to their breed. So when the body is out of order, there will be a main element that's affected. So really, these are the most common patterns you will see. So spleen qi deficiency exists almost in every pet that has some sort of other problem going on. It is often caused by liver qi stagnation or just flat out bad diet. Shin disturbance, we talked about briefly, kidney yin deficiency, especially for cats, and then again, liver qi stagnation. So having all of this in mind, this is where we can use food therapy to help support specific organs, support the constitutional element to help prevent problems from arising, and then also to treat the actual pattern of disharmony. We're finally through all this.